What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Tyler Plath, back at you with the latest edition of Waiver Wire Monday, where we've got some players who are trending upwards. We've got some players who are steadily producing over the last couple weeks and somehow aren't rostered. And then we've got some players who could see a potential increase in work because of injured players in front of them. So before I begin, make sure you're subscribed. Give this video a like. It helps support us and everything we are doing here. Going to keep the intro short and sweet so we can get to the list and not going to keep you waiting any longer. So first player we will discuss is Colts wide receiver Josh Downs. He finished with 8 targets, and while he only mustered 5 receptions for 21 yards on those targets, he did find the end zone. And the biggest takeaway for Josh Downs is that Alec Pierce left the game early on Sunday with a shoulder injury, and James Boyd of The Athletic reported that Pierce was sporting a bigger wrap on his shoulder after he exited, which is a sign that there's potential he misses next week, that it's a lot more serious than just getting dinged up. And if Pierce is out, that means more opportunities for Josh Downs, who's been an absolute target hog with Gardner Minshew under center. Josh Downs made last week's video. He makes it again this week as one of the best ads for week 7. And with that, we'll transition to the next guy, Dolphins running back Jeff Wilson, who doesn't exactly meet our 50% roster criteria, but we have to mention him. We have to talk about him because even though he didn't play on Sunday, he is now going into week 2 of his 21-day activation window off the injured reserve, and there really shouldn't be much explanation when it comes to the intrigue of Jeff Wilson. I mean, this Dolphins offense is a running back's dream, and because of that, they're first in yards per carry with 6.5. That's a full yard and then some over the next team. They have the most rushing touchdowns. They're tied for the most runs over 20 yards. They have the most runs over 40 yards. Friend of the pod, Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy. Shout out to Hayden and our friends over at Underdog. He charts running back fantasy usage, which essentially is just expected fantasy points based on usage. And the Dolphins are fourth. They're top 5. If your concern is there isn't enough work or volume for Wilson to be productive, let me remind you that Devon Achane, before getting hurt, put up 27 fantasy points on 11 touches against Buffalo and 21.5 fantasy points on 12 touches against the Giants. Now, it's not a one-for-one between Achane and Wilson, but that's just a testament to how productive Dolphins running backs can be on their touches for fantasy football. Kareem Hunt saw his highest snap count of the year on Sunday and turned in a solid fantasy performance. He had 12 rushing attempts, 47 yards, almost 4 yards a carry. He had a rushing touchdown, and he also had 3 receptions for 24 yards. And I mentioned on last Thursday's matchups episode on the podcast that Browns running backs were a sit for me because of the matchup against the Niners and the potential that Kareem Hunt gets more work coming off of the bye week. And now I don't think anyone saw the Browns beating the Niners first and foremost, but surely didn't see Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt averaging 4.5 yards per carry between the two of them against the Niners when they've allowed some of the fewest yards per carry to running backs on the year. So the take to sit them ended up not being the greatest take, but the point of Kareem Hunt getting more work couldn't have been any more right. And I think this backfield moving forward starts to look a little more like a 50-50, a 55-45 split than the 60-40, 65-35 split we saw before the bye week, which makes Kareem Hunt a fairly valuable ad this week. Staying in the same game, Jordan Mason came in for the Niners after Christian McCaffrey left with an oblique injury, and he did try to come back in, but then he exited and was then out for the rest of the game. And if McCaffrey misses this next week, Jordan Mason may be the lead guy. And yes, Elijah Mitchell is still on the team. He's played on Sunday. He's healthy. But it was Jordan Mason that got the majority of snaps, the rushing attempts, the routes, and the 2-minute snaps when McCaffrey left. So we'll have to wait and see if Mason finds your lineup based on McCaffrey's status. But if he's out, Jordan Mason should be the priority ad over Elijah Mitchell. Now, it's likely that the workload won't fully go to Jordan Mason, but if you had to choose between the two, our vote would be Jordan Mason over Elijah Mitchell. Wan'Dale Robinson has quietly become the most productive pass catcher on the New York Giants outside of Darren Waller over the last couple weeks. And on Sunday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills, he had 8 receptions on 8 targets for 62 yards after being the number 2 target getter in weeks 4 and 5. Wan'Dale Robinson now leads the Giants in targets per route run in only 4 games. We talked about targets per route run last week, and you can lead your team in targets per route run, but it may not mean a whole lot if you're not getting snaps. But we've been seeing more and more Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt over the last 3 weeks, and we've been seeing less and less of Isaiah Hodgins and Paris Campbell. So being the leader in targets per route run and getting more and more snaps, it's trending in the right direction for Wan'Dale Robinson, and he's going to continue being a reception target machine in this Giants offense. And I know this Giants offense has been disappointing so far this year, but Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, they clearly target Wan'Dale Robinson over most of, if not any of the other wide receivers in this offense. Wan'Dale's worth the roster spot at this point. Did you know that Curtis Samuel is the wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks? Granted, he's found the end zone in each of those games, but he's just been on an absolute heater lately. Touchdowns aren't the stickiest of stats to bank on, but what you can bank on is the fact that Samuel is second on the Commanders in targets, and he has 10 more receptions than Jahan Dotson, which is slightly disappointing because there was so many signs pointing towards a step forward for Jahan Dotson, and just has not happened so far this year. It may be time to start putting some more respect on Curtis Samuel's name, because for whatever the reason is, Sam Howell is finding Curtis Samuel more than some of the other guys we thought he could be looking towards. You know, Terry McLaurin has had some spike weeks. We've only seen Jahan Dotson produce only a handful of weeks. Logan Thomas has been way more productive than anyone could have imagined for this year. So like I said, it may be time to start putting some respect on Curtis Samuel's name, and you can do that by adding him off of waivers this week. We talked about Rashee Rice in last week's video, and he makes the list again this week because there's something we need to tell you. Rashee Rice leads all Chiefs wide receivers in targets, in receptions, in receiving yards, and touchdowns. The stats that really, really matter for fantasy football. And on top of that, we just saw a career high in routes ran from Rashee Rice on Thursday Night Football against the Broncos. So are we seeing Rashee Rice being rewarded for how well he's done on limited snaps? I think there's a good chance that we are. And now Rice's ceiling is going to be relatively capped, rest of the season really, because this offense still goes through Mahomes and Kelsey, and Isaiah Pacheco has also had a great start to this year. But based on what we've seen the past 2 weeks, Rashee Rice should be added in case we continue to see more of this moving forward. What if Rashee Rice becomes the wide receiver 1 on the Kansas City Chiefs? I think it is much, much more possible than it was at the beginning of the season. I brought this guy up in last week's video, and I can't believe I'm about to do it again. But Jonnu Smith needs to be rostered at this point. He needs to. He's the tight end 9 right now on the season, who has been the tight end 5 in the last 3 weeks. He's averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game over that stretch. And even with Kyle Pitts and Drake London's success the past 2 weeks, who are both top 10 in scoring over that stretch, Jonnu is still averaging 12 fantasy points a game. I still cannot believe that we're talking about Jonnu Smith as a reliable fantasy option in 2023. You could not have put that on my bingo card at the beginning of the year, but here we are. If you're relying on guys like Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz, David Njoku, Tyler Higbee, drop them. Drop them and go pick up Jonnu Smith. Do it right now. I wish I was overreacting, but you can't run from the truth that Jonnu Smith is a reliable option in fantasy football. Last couple guys here are our streamers for week 7, and with 6 teams on bye this upcoming week, we're going to need some streaming help. So first guy I'll bring up is Geno Smith, who takes on the Arizona Cardinals, and the Cardinals are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks on the year. Now, I know Geno has been disappointing most of his matchups this year, but the matchup alone just makes Geno worthwhile as a streaming option for week 7. And the other streaming option is Jordan Love. Don't hate me. For whatever reason, there has been a near 180 turn on the narrative of Jordan Love. And while it may not be super great on the field, fantasy football has a different story to tell. He now goes up against the Broncos in week 7, and the Broncos are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Now, Jordan Love, I know, did not have a great game against the Raiders, but before that, he was averaging over 18 fantasy points a game. I know the results haven't been there for the Packers lately, but they're coming off the bye, going up against the Denver Broncos. Jordan Love should probably find his way into your lineup. That'll do it for our top 10 waiver ads for week 7. A quick recap of those 10 players as usual. Josh Downs, Jeff Wilson, Kareem Hunt, Jordan Mason, Wan'Dale Robinson, Curtis Samuel, Rashee Rice, Jonnu Smith, Geno Smith, and Jordan Love. A couple of honorable mentions for you that just missed out on the list. D'Onta Foreman, who had 15 rushing attempts and 65 yards against the Minnesota Vikings. He may have carved out a role for himself in Khalil Herbert's absence, so we may be seeing a mix of Roschon Johnson and D'Onta Foreman moving forward. Rashid Shaheed, who finished with 85 yards and a tutty, but only on 2 receptions. And Kendrick Bourne, who got 10 receptions on 11 targets for 89 yards. That may be worth keeping an eye on moving forward. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the content we put out to help you not only win your week-to-week matchups, but ultimately to win your leagues. Hit the like button if you liked this video, and go ahead and join us down in the comment section. Drop your other waiver suggestions. Ask us any questions. We'll be down there answering them as you ask. So again, thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.